My name is Timothy Summers. I'm the Executive Director of Product Development Digital Trust at Arizona State University. This is our 18th Innov8, I believe. And just wanted to say thanks to everyone that continues to show up, continues to come and join the conversations, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. It's just always really exciting to just see some luminaries and thought leaders sharing their perspectives on really cool work that they're doing, things that they've done, and just really just innovative things that are happening out there. Tonight we have a really interesting guest. Oren is someone that for a long time, actually, even before we'd met, I'd heard about Oren many times. I'd heard about some of the work that he'd done, and we come from a really small community. I just remember there being sort of these mythical stories about some really cool and amazing guys in security before my class, if you will. And I'm really excited to welcome Oren Falkowitz with us tonight. He's a founder of Area 1 Security, as well as a few other organizations and ventures as well. Oren's a serial entrepreneur. One of the most interesting projects I remember, one of the first projects I heard about was a Squirrel. Oren was a founder, I believe, at Squirrel as well. But he's led Area 1 from its founding. I think you guys are just shy of a decade now, 7, 8 years, something like that.
Yeah, just shy of 8 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So amazing. And the mission was to discover and eliminate targeted phishing attacks before they cause damage. And previously held some senior positions at the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command, where he was focused on computer network operations and big data. That's where he realized the immense need for preemptive cybersecurity. Oren holds many patents and is an avid fan of Bow Tie Thursdays. So Oren, you'll have to tell us a little bit about Bow Tie Thursdays, but it's just awesome to have you with us tonight. And hey, thanks for joining, and kick it over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. Yeah, I'm really excited to be with you all, and I appreciate the invitation. I decided not to use slides and just talk, and so I have some thoughts to share at the beginning, but also I'm eager to have a conversation with folks as we get through it. Timothy did a really great job of giving sort of my professional background, but let me just start and just give a little bit more about who I am as a person. I mean, I grew up in South Florida, and I came to Washington, D.C. To work for the National Security Agency, really not to focus on cybersecurity, really to focus on ballistic missiles and counterproliferation and nuclear weapons proliferation. And really because I believe really strongly in kind of like the mission of our government and all the good things that they try to do. And it was a really exciting place to work at. When I worked at NSA, the first job that I had was at a place called the DEFSMAC. It stands for the Defense Special Missile Aerospace Center. And our job was to discover when do countries, when are they going to launch missiles? Not in wartime, but for research, development, testing, and evaluation. So we could understand capabilities, and we could create countermeasures, for them. And the way that we would go about doing this really hadn't changed in about 30 years. And essentially we'd look for things like NOTAMs, right? Notice to airmen, like, hey, don't fly in this airspace on this day. We'd say, oh, that's an indicator. Right? That's an indicator that something's going to happen there. Or we'd see pictures of missiles on launch pads, but we never had the kind of precision in terms of actual launch times, and it created a lot of challenges, right? And a lot of sort of like misforecasting, if you will. And so I just turned to the head of the organization. And I said, don't you think that maybe they have a calendar, or it's like on their Google Calendar or their Microsoft Calendar, and that's something that we could discover. And that's how I got, sort of thrown into the world of cybersecurity. And in those days, our thought was really offensive to start. And I think, like many things in life, if you're kind of at the right place, right time, you get to work with really smart people like the folks who I've now co-founded companies with, but, that I worked with there. initially you get to learn a lot and you get to do a lot of great things, and we do a lot of really amazing things, and it was really exciting. But towards the end of the time, is when U.S. government really started to get serious about stopping cyber attacks, right? We had our fun kind of breaking into computers, and we were quite successful at it. And I'd say today, like, the barriers to entry for hackers, across the world is pretty limited. But we started to pay attention to that. And we also started to understand that, stealing data in large volumes, while kind of like exciting and important, is really only as good as what you can do to analyze it. And so that sort of drew part of my time working in the U.S. government towards data analytics and what people call big data and so forth. And one of the projects that Timothy alluded to, we open sourced. It's called Cumulo. It's part of the Apache Software Foundation. And an advisor we had at NSA came to me and said, you should start a company, around this. And I looked at him and I said, what is a company, right? I don't even know what you're talking about. And the reason I share this is because two things. I think that the mission that folks set themselves on, whether as an individual, whether they're part of the government, or whether they're part of a company, it really matters, right? Like what your core raison d'etre is, and why do you wake up, every moment to do it, and what compromises are you willing to take? And some of those compromises have led to some of the disastrous results, obviously, that we see in the marketplace today. The second reason I sort of share some of this background too is that, it also matters what your approach is, right? And it's very hard to understand the complexity and motivations and strategies for cyber attacks, right? If you've never launched cyber attacks before. And we see too much hand-wringing about strategies that are obviously feckless or kind of meaningless, because I think the approach is wrong, and people don't understand why it matters, or what they can do different. And then lastly, I think the third reason I mentioned this in my transition from working as a public servant to private enterprise is that outcomes really matter. And the core difference, that I've seen over that time is that when people like General Schmidl, who's at Arizona State University, who's the Deputy Commander at Cyber Command, or General Alexander, who's the Director of the National Security Agency, when they come to you, and when the president comes to them and says, we need to protect U.S. forces in Iraq from improvised explosive devices, they don't turn around and say, like, we'll stop like 65% of it. They focus on outcomes that are significant and meaningful, and are whole approaches, and are final in their totality. And that's something across the three things I mentioned: the reason you do it, right? What it is you're focusing on, how you go about doing it, and what the ultimate outcomes are, and how you measure them. The lack of that is why we find ourselves today in the cybersecurity space not having the kind of results that we expect and we demand. And it matters what those outcomes are, not only for us as individuals, because our personal information gets stolen, or we lose our social security numbers. It matters for the corporations that we work with, because they're losing intellectual property, or they're losing financial outcomes. It matters for our country, because we're becoming less competitive. We're seeing the effects of disinformation. We're seeing what happens when cities like Baltimore, or school districts around the country. I think over half the hospitals in the United States have been victims to ransomware. Surgeries get shut down, and so forth. It really matters, right? And the time for this kind of like, cybersecurity is this kind of, sci-fi fiction thing, really needs to go away. And we need a much more serious kind of mission approach and outcome-based thing there. I think to start, the thing that people don't understand first is that if you don't begin to change the economics of being a bad guy on the internet today, which is like a really incredible business, it's just not going to get any better. It's never been easier to go register like a Google account, send 100 emails, and walk away with tons of money, or really, significant things. And the delta between what we think of as sophisticated and what's actually sophisticated, it has really never been larger. And fundamentally, hacking, from my experience, is really like a lazy person sport. right? Hackers want to do kind of like the least amount of thing. They don't want to like program foundational like computer science breakthroughs to hack. They want to find simple ways like through phishing or through clickbait and so forth. And they want to find the targets that are the least defended, where they can just kind of move on. And that's happening at an exorbitant rate. And until you can change those economic terms, I don't think you're going to see any results. But those economic terms also need to fold in, and the companies that are pushing solutions need to also be held accountable economically as well. Over the last 10 years, we've gone on a trajectory from saying things like, there are two types of companies, like those that have been hacked and those who don't know that they've been hacked yet, right? And that was kind of a clever quip, in my view, to kind of bring people forward to like, maybe this is a thing you don't know going on. But at this point, statistically, everyone's been impacted by it. But the claims and the kind of like the posturing of the companies in the space has led to billions of dollars of investment, and the results have literally never been worse, right? And there just remains kind of like a total lack of accountability on the proponents of the space. And you see the same type of things regurgitated, over and over. And so that, kind of at the forefront is something that, unless it gets right-sided, we're not going to see a better outcome. And then what I like to talk to people about too is also being able to reject some of the conventional wisdom that really holds us back. The first thing you typically see or hear anytime there's a breach, whether it's like a SolarWinds or whether it's an election hack or whether it's like a school system, is a press release that calls the attack unprecedented. And I've only seen one unprecedented cyber attack in my life, and I think really serious people would agree that like most of these attacks are pretty vanilla, right? And the statistics are that 9 in 10 attacks today start with email phishing, right? Getting a human like you or I to click on a link or download a file or enter a username and password on a website, or sometimes with no link in file, just someone says, hey, wire me money, and they go off and do it. There is literally nothing unprecedented about the attacks that are hurting our country or today. What often is unprecedented, or what seems unprecedented, is the feeling that the victims have as they try to grapple with why are they entangled in this web. And I'll just share kind of an anecdote. I met with the CEO of like a large ice cream company, right? And he said, I don't understand like why these hackers would come after me. Like, we make ice cream, it's delicious, and people enjoy it over the summer and so forth. And we had to point out to him that, like, they're one of the largest credit card processors in the world. I mean, it's really not about the ice cream. It's really just the fact that they process, millions and millions of credit cards, and that's, a value. And so while everybody is feeling like, they're the victim, or, they're they've been sort of, hand-picked for some unfair reason, the reality is it's just a mass kind of a plague that's infecting us. The second part of conventionalism, as it relates to accountability, is that cyber actors are invincible. You often see, again, post-breach, or when people talk about Russia or North Korea or the National Security Agency or the Mossad or the Unit 8200 or you name it, or the French or something, that there's this air of like invincibility, that if you were to ask someone to draw a picture of a really sophisticated or really elite computer hacker, you'd probably get some SEAL Team 6 like guy in a frog suit and like lasers and the whole thing. And the reality is that they're probably, slightly chubby Floridians who like to, drink Dr. Pepper and like eat Cheetos and like gummy bears kind of like incessantly. And, reframing our mental model in this space is really critical as well. We can't do polling here, but I bet if we were to like poll and I was ask folks, their thoughts about our capabilities, post creating a really incredible vaccine, or, to address climate change through science, technology, approaches, people would feel pretty confident that we have the intellectual capacity to reduce carbon emissions, or, to create more renewable energy and so forth, which essentially, creating affecting the outcomes of like our our Earth, right? So it's more inhabitable for us. But in the same breath, they would probably think that like some folks who are adept at the cybersecurity speak would probably tell you, well, you can do that, well, you can change how the Earth works. It's not possible to stop a bunch of losers like in their basement from hacking computers all over the world. And that's the kind of thing that we need to reject, and we need to say no, these things are possible, but we really need to be focusing on, where are we dedicating our resources, and what are the solutions, and how are we going to measure the outcomes, and who are we going to hold responsible when things go wrong. Too many companies are, like to blame their interns or some vendor or some configuration, and not really take responsibility for that the solution was always kind of right in front of them. The third thing that I address is that the individuals, right, can really be responsible, and I primarily mean that the person who clicks on the message or who shares their password or sends the files, that somehow they're the ones responsible rather than us creating the framework and the bubble around them, and that the leadership that we see in organizations and government is totally lacking there, and people are very quick at the point of the person. In 100% of the breaches that I've been involved with or have seen kind of the detailed data, you find that the person who's the root cause, primarily the victim of a phishing attack, you find that they are just trying to do their jobs correctly, right? That in the rush of trying to do their job, or in the need to satisfy like their boss, that they get caught up in this. At the Pentagon, if you were to receive an email from a superior officer, so to speak, you don't, or if you worked at the Walt Disney Company and the CEO emailed you, it used to be Bob Iger, but I can't remember the guy's name, but you don't say like, hey, Mr. CEO, I got this email from you and he was asking for all these financial reports. I thought it was a little weird, so I just deleted it. Like, that's not the reality of how things work. And that's why you also can't, blame the responsibility. The responsibility and the accountability lies in the people we put in charge to educate folks about the risks, but to put, more importantly, the technologies in place, and then to hold the technology vendors in place to account when their solutions fail, because their solution slick sheets are never short of stopping every problem on planet Earth. And then the last piece that I would say before we take questions is that the solution in the space cannot be treating this as a risk problem and that people go off and buy insurance. The problems that we face and the attack types that you see are straightforward. The assets that folks are going after, whether it's passwords or credit card information or intellectual property or just raw, dollars and cents, they need to be protected like Fort Knox, and people need to be really serious about it. And treating everything like an actuary gives people the excuse to not be really serious about the outcomes, because it's part of the risk profile and we have downside protection. There is no downside protection for the types of damages that we're seeing, where you see society fragmenting and where you see the hard competitiveness advantages that we have just crumbling away. So, if you look back, lastly, I'll just say that, if you look back through human history, I would say that this problem is not even in the top 100 of things that we've already done as a species, and to that extent with less sophisticated tools, mind you. For instance, when we sent people to the moon in 1969, the computer in that capsule that took 3 guys, it produced 7.6 million pounds of thrust, and the computer in it far inferior to anything that's in your pocket or on your wrist today. The discovery of things like germs, right? Like little invisible, creatures in the food and air and water that make you sick is a pretty remarkable discovery. The ability to take flight, the automobile, the hundreds of millions of machines transporting people, all over the world. The internet itself, doing it for free, solar power, right, harvesting energy from the sun, engineering feats like the Eiffel Tower or any modern skyscraper for that matter. My grandfather, 20 years, he's 95, 20 years ago had a heart transplant. Being able to take a human's heart outside of them while it's still beating, put a new one in, and then like send them home is totally like mind blowing. And then, I always like to tell people the thermos, is my greatest invention, because if you put something hot in it, it stays hot. And if you put something cold in it, it stays cold. And the question always is, how does it know? That's sort of an old joke, but great invention. But if you really think about the capacity that we humans have, again, the generic kind of vanilla nature of these things should lead us to believe that there's a very possible kind of outcome. So maybe from there we could start, with maybe a few questions if anyone has them.
Got one right here. How is it possible that a multi-billion-dollar corporation like Home Depot or T-Mobile doesn't have sufficient security to prevent their data being stolen?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, I think there's a difference between having resources and then applying those resources, properly. And I think Home Depot in particular, which is sort of, one of the older breaches, I think, folks, if you're a store and you're stocking screws and fiddle leaf figs and lumber and, paint and so forth, you're probably sitting there thinking to yourself like, what does anyone want with me? But again, there's obviously the credit cards are kind of an interesting thing. And, that's it. I mean, you need to have the approach, kind of understanding of the problem. And I think to the credit of the Targets and the Home Depots and the folks who had some of those mega early breaches, I'm forgetting the time, but, probably in the, early teens or 2000 teens, a lot of them have made really great progress and have hired really smart people and have built really credible teams and have really learned from that. Sometimes being the victim is a rebirth opportunity. I think we've seen many companies do that, but we've also seen many companies not do that and stick their head in the sand and so forth. So, yeah, that's sort of my thought.
Jay, did you have a question as well?
Yes, I do, Timothy. Thank you. Oren, thanks. You mentioned the asymmetry of the financial incentives that are out there. Are you seeing any, other than punitive approaches, are you seeing any, let's say, counter incentives that might bring forth information in this realm? So for instance, I put in a link to an item that I just Googled for prediction markets to hedge information security risks. So sort of like dynamic betting markets that would bring forth information regarding, pending potential breaches and so forth. If that does that make sense?
It does. Most of my thing, I'll read this afterwards and follow up with you as well. It looks really interesting. Most of my thought on aligning incentives has to do with vendors and thinking about what's the real value you're getting for it. And not to be self-serving, I'll share an example from something that we pioneered at Area 1 Security. But we came up with a model which is what we call pay per phish. Essentially said to our customers, if we don't do the thing that we say we do, which is stop a phishing attack, you pay nothing for it. And you only have to pay us when we actually provide the value that we talk about. And if you think about that, actually, well, it's really interesting, right? Because it aligns incentives properly. It says two things. One, if you don't think that if you're like a Home Depot, just to use your colleagues question, and you don't think that there's a problem, no risk, right? Like why not do it? If you have other solutions and you think that you want to test if they're really working well, it's a great opportunity. But also more importantly, if you're unsure of how technologies are going to advance over time, we all know that like technology degrades faster than carbon 14, right? That it makes sure that the company has to keep up with the evolution in the space. But if you take it one step further and you just think more broadly about the market, and if you look at particularly publicly traded cybersecurity companies, and you look at some of the ones who are on record runs, and then you match the value in terms of the benefit they provide to the dollars that people pay, you'll find that the incentive is totally out of control, right? Like it makes no sense whatsoever. And so that's the question I think that executives should be really asking, which is like, if I'm paying an endpoint agent company or I'm paying a firewall company X millions of dollars, how many things are they actually protecting me from? And why wouldn't I just pay them or be able to align the end result to the dollar spent and have a rational discussion? We do that in a lot of other things. That's sort of the trend in cloud computing. When you use compute, you pay Amazon for it or Google for it or Microsoft for it and so forth. But in this space, this space where you see constant failure, you see constant misalignment, and yet people continue to spend more and more money on it. So I'll take a look at it, but my thought is really around aligning the dollars that go to the solution providers and making sure there's more transparency and accountability on that front.
Yeah, if I could
yeah,
make another analogy that might be, fit within that context and framework of analysis, is cybersecurity to me is a lot like trying to make everybody put the aluminum cans in the recycling bucket and the banana peels in the trash. And, that generally doesn't work. However, if you put some sort of deposit, let's say, on the aluminum cans or the Coke bottles or whatever, now all of a sudden you've got a financial incentive for people to, at least give it a little more thought. So anyway, that's,
yeah, I would only say that my thought is that there's too much focus on incentives for individuals. One of the questions in here is that, as I said, 95% of attacks, if you go back and you look at what was the initial root cause for the attacker to gain access, you'll find that's phishing. The answer to that is not like for humans to get better at stopping phishing attacks, right? Because they can't, because we're curious, we love a good story, and cyber attacks are really about authenticity. They're either personal authenticity, like you think it's from your boss in some of the examples I mentioned, or it has some sort of visual acuity to it, like it looks like it's from Bank of America, or it looks like it's from Arizona State University. And humans aren't able to discern that. That's what technology, is for. And so just to elevate, I think your incentives is correct, but I think it has to be brought up a level, right? And it needs to be brought more into the technological sphere, which is, how about the city creates an incentive for in your apartment building for something that sorts the trash, right? Like it's a way better way to do it than having each of us like crush the cans. We're lazy. Sometimes like, your girlfriend's coming home and you got to just clear the beer cans out. Like there's a lot of reasons why you might not do it, right? So, I would just, that would be my thought, is like, you got to get off blaming people, right? And we got to think more systematically about it at the points where you can have the greatest impact. So
agreed. Thank you.
Thanks.
No, thank you. Yeah. All right. So John has a question. He says,
Oren, actually, I think Stephanie had a question for you, and then I think John dropped her after that. No, don't worry.
Yeah, you killed two birds with one stone there. So thank you so much. That's great. I think authenticity, you kind of hit it on the head there. That I really appreciated your answer. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that I'll just add one clarifying point. People often ask like, well, what do you think about like training or education programs? I think they're important, because I think when you're building teams in corporate cultures or university cultures, it's important that if you're in the security department or you're part of the security executive leadership, that the colleagues in finance or your colleagues in logistics or whatever it is, they know kind of some general what it is you're doing, because otherwise you're like, don't click emails, right? And you become the tinfoil hat wearing person. And so those programs, I think though, they need to evolve to be more about culture and about like shared understanding and like what it is that we're doing, and give some personal benefit to susceptibility, but they're not a solution. They're just like a stepping stone to we're speaking the same language kind of thing. And but 100% of folks who run those programs think that it's going to do something to prevent the next attack. And that's just not going to happen. Okay, so let's see. So John says, let's see, I find it ironic that there is a data breach, for example, California affecting my kids, they offer you Experian for free, Experience the most drastic breaches. And they were, well, John, I couldn't agree more. You know, you can basically look at, you can look at like post-breach responses, and you will see a pretty generic sort of template, right? Because folks are clearly caught off hand and like have not, you know, thought about this, which is like the attack was unprecedented, the attacker was sophisticated. We are going to hire Chris Krebs, Alex Stamos, and CrowdStrike, maybe FireEye Mandiant, and you're going to get Equifax or Experian, right? Or you're going to get Equifax, right? And yeah, I mean, it's absurd, right? Then that kind of generic response, and the same is true if you read any FBI bulletin, any Department of Homeland Security bulletin, which is like, use two-factor authentication, don't click on links, or this, you know, generic input. What it says to me is that people, they don't know what the mission is, they don't understand the approach, and they're not accountable for the results, and they just are filling in the template. And that's part of what, you know, I'm advocating in this conversation is wrong, and it needs to change. And I think anytime you see that response, you get a sense for what's really going on, and you should be fighting back, you know, on it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to, because every time this happens, like my daughter's like, should I get Experian? I say, don't bother. You know, it's not going to really make you any more secure. This is just them trying to make nice, because they don't want to be held completely culpable for what occurred. What they really need to do is a whole series of other measures, which, you know, either are too expensive, or they're not willing to do, like essentially the major retrofitting that they'd have to do in order to do it.
Correct. Yep. I totally agree. But I think what it says to you, what it says to you is an indicator of like what their response to it's going to be. Look, we have choices, right, in this world. Sometimes they're not good choices, but we can often vote with our dollars. And I think, you know, in this space, when folks don't treat your data correctly, when they misuse it, you know, when they don't take breaches, I think you can vote with your data and your dollars and pull it out. And but yeah, that's definitely, it's a hard nut to crack in terms of what you do. I think that those are solutions, but yeah, there's not much recourse, but the response tells you everything, right? I think that's what we agree on. Okay. Let's see. So Deepak says, do you think with more and more corporates adopting business communication tools like Slack lead to the death of emails we know as well? Absolutely not, Deepak. People have been talking about the death of email. Email has hit record highs. Anybody who uses Slack or those types of communications will tell you that they're pretty inefficient for business. I don't think I'm a Luddite for saying that I'm a lover of email. I do think that the attack space is more diverse, given the diverse set of communication tools that you can have, whether it's Signal or Snapchat or TikTok or anything with direct message, or including Slack and so forth. But email is the single largest business application in the world today, and it will not die ever. So.
Yeah, but do you agree that our reliance on email has certainly reduced since the Slack and Teams kind of took over, you know, at least in the past year and a half, since COVID? Do you think that that will affect the kind of data breaches that we use? Yeah.
There's a couple of things I'll say about that. One, email has never been hotter. I mean, if email was like the new, you know, the 40 is the new 30, email is like never had a better moment in its life. It's the most direct way to get in front of people. It is the single largest business application out there. Things like Slack and internal communications and short comms, they're effective for some things. They're generally annoying, and they're terrible for business. Most executives will tell you they don't like it. They're also not cross-organizational. But the thing that's important to note, though, what I really want to say about things like Slack and Teams and so forth, is that the medium by which you're communicating is not really the thing that matters, that much if you have the right approach to solving the problem. Because there are really only three ways to attack a person, right? The first is to get them to download a file. So those files, right, the files can be shared in these tools, but the same file analyzers that work in email can run in these systems. Get people to click on links. When you click on links, it goes out through DNS, and the same types of outbound web protections can still be used to protect users from getting to malvertising sites or credential harvesting sites or watering holes and so forth. And the third is authentic attacks where you think it's like an executive or so forth. Those are more limited in that space because there's more password provisioning. You're not usually dealing inter-organizational, and so that's part of the reason you don't see them as great attack vectors. But they're also, if your approach is right from a security solutions perspective, it doesn't really matter what people use. Links are links. You can click on a link on your phone. You can click on a link here. If you have the right kind of protections, you'll still get the right kind of outcomes. Does that make sense, Deepak?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I mean, we use Slack even for our vendors. I mean, we have channels for our vendors, so they don't really need to communicate with us via email because they are available on Slack channels. So that certainly reduces some of the communication that we used to.
We certainly do that. We communicate with some vendors on Slack, but we don't do business on Slack, right? We don't do that type of thing. But you look, I think I'll just throw another data point. I think if Slack was going to kill email, it wouldn't have been acquired by Salesforce, right? Email is pretty big. So, look, I'm not sensitive to what the communication path is. I'm sensitive to protecting people, but I push back kind of hard here because I think sometimes you see in the space people try to shift narratives around what's really the attack vector, and once we eliminate all of the phishing threats, which represent 9 out of 10 origins of cyber attacks, we can focus on all sorts of random laser shooting through Pringles cans and LED side channel attacks and so forth. But we need to really focus, and today it's all happening via email.
Right. Thanks. Great insights.
Is the approach to security basically the same for an ASU, Home Depot? Yes, exactly. Well, I think so. What Lisa asked is that, what do you do if you're a small business, if you're an individual, if you're a Home Depot, right? There seems to be a resource misalignment, and I think this is really important question, and why outcomes kind of based pricing I think are really critical, and holding vendors accountable. The richest company in the world or the most sophisticated government should have access to the same technology that a K through 12 school system has in any state or a nonprofit has, and so forth. And part of that is by kind of identifying the problem, and by being able to focus on it, be able to focus on the kind of the right things for your organization. I think probably 70% of the spend at Fortune 500s is slightly wasteful, and and you're not seeing, for all when I mentioned before, the billions of dollars being spent, you're not seeing the Global 2000 outperform SMBs. So some of the best programs that I've seen are really with the best programs I've seen, regardless of size or dollars spent on program, are really about the focus and the approach that the team takes and their seriousness to measuring the outcomes. And so that can be done at all levels. And so Arizona State can have better security than Goldman Sachs, and Mothers Against Drunk Driving can have better security than Arizona State, and so forth. It's about the leadership, it's about the approach they take, and it's about figuring out, how they're going to measure the right outcomes. Did that answer your question, Lisa? Okay.
I'll just say yes, thank you.
Oh, okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, I know a business that was hacked via an email to an employee and they didn't even know it at the time. And they got in and they just watched them and read their emails for a very long time. And they knew when the main owner was out of town on vacation because of that. And then they chose that time to attack them with a fake email of, oh, you've got to transfer this much money right now.
Yep.
So,
I'm loath to bring it up as an analogy because it's so, I'm not entirely sure why it's so tenuous today, but some of this is a little bit like what you would think about doing with the vaccine, right? It's like the weakest link out there can have the biggest impact. We often see at our Fortune 500 customers that their small providers have exactly the scenario that you described, and it costs them millions of dollars. It's right until the antidote is provided sort of evenly, right? And it's not just like the 1,000-person team spending $100 million a year feels like they're really secure, which they're not, right? And the statistics don't back it up for them. You don't really get any better. And in fact, I would say in some cases, it's even more important to support the quote unquote little guy because the consequences of the losses are much greater for them. One major airline, that we worked with over many years, we protected them from hundreds of millions of dollars in that type of attack, what we call a business email compromise, type 3, sort of a supply chain, attack. And on some, it was a great detection and kind of a great win for our customer relationship. But on some level, you can almost imagine that they can absorb that kind of a loss. But in other cases, like I've seen, K through 12 schools or religious organizations or nonprofits or small businesses, you can get hit with a $25,000 attack, right? Not hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's crippling. They don't have extra money in the budget. They don't have fancy insurance programs. They don't have the ability to go trace it down around the world with commandos and so forth. And I think the impacts for these things are, even though the headlines in the newspaper are always showing the largest, the most sophisticated companies being breached, like the bigger headline, the bigger damages. But the impacts are hurting the smaller companies at a far drastic rate. And it's just often not talked about. Restaurants, you name it, right? Like you can't make your payroll, or an individual, you can't make your identity gets stolen, you can't get a mortgage. Far more damaging than whether or not Facebook can afford $50 million. We all know that they can't, right? So it's one of the big problems with the way the issue gets covered topically, right? Because it's caught up in a it bleeds, it leads kind of thing. So. Okay, let's see. Elizabeth says, how hard is it to convince executives not to put the blame on individuals who fall for phishing and not to be angry if a subordinate challenges email request that looks phishing to them? I don't think it's too hard. It starts, as I mentioned, it's a culture issue, right? It's about the mission that your CEO or president or chancellor is on, and the people that they've put in charge to be in charge of security. I think when people blame individuals, and you've seen this in the SolarWinds congressional testimony, like the new CEO, I think was remorseful about the blame of the intern. That's pretty poor to blame the intern, right? Like we all know that, and I think they look silly for doing it. And I think folks are learning that, so I don't think that's too challenging. My point about the subordinates challenging the email question is I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I just don't think it's human nature. And I've just been in that scenario myself, and I like to say, I've seen a lot of attacks. I'm pretty smart, I can smell it when it's happening, but there are just some scenarios where you're working quick and you think it's your board member, it's the boss, whatever it is. It's just not practical to rely on that as a stopgap. So,
Oren, I had a quick question for you.
You're just gonna cut in front of Barnaby?
Wait, did Barnaby toss a question in there real quick?
Go for it, Timothy. I'm just kidding.
Oh man, no. I want to go for Barnaby.
Go for it. We'll mix it up.
On the if you take a look at Wikipedia for Area 1's Wikipedia page, there's some really cool stuff on there about different types of cyber campaigns that you guys discovered. And was just curious, like for example, 2018, you guys revealed a Chinese government cyber campaign, pretty interesting stuff. There's some stuff about 2020, some Russian government phishing campaign stuff. Just curious, I'm sure that a lot of folks wonder about some of these things and wonder about, at least how to protect themselves, their families. And I know you shared some of that stuff earlier, but maybe if you could give some insight into kind of what does that stuff look like from your lens, and when you're looking at it from that phishing lens and where you guys are, where everyone is sitting, what's this stuff really look like? Because it seems so massive to a regular everyday individual.
Well, it looks pretty generic, to be honest with you. Most of the attacks are things like reset your password, right? It looks like it's coming from Microsoft or from Google, or it looks like, something that's coming from your bank. Every year we publish what we call the March Hackness. It's like the NCAA top 64 brands that are being used to phish. And it's not surprising that it really only changes based on who's popular. The most popular things is like Apple, Facebook, Google, banks, and so forth. But when you see something new like TikTok come across, you'll see it kind of rise up. And so it's because attackers are trying to blend, right? They're trying to do things that you recognize that seem normal to you from a visual perspective, from a communications perspective. And so most of the attacks you see are pretty kind of generic. Outside of that, once someone gets into an organization, then you start to see some like more interesting things. How do they try to hide themselves? How quickly do they try to exfiltrate data? But the thing that we really think about, the thing that helps you untangle the Gordian knot of the attack is to consider that the attacker has a goal, right? And that's the thing that most people don't consider. And what I mentioned about the ice cream company and probably Home Depot, maybe, some long time ago. And when you consider what the goal is, then it becomes very clear what's going on. But that's hard for people to abstractly do, and a lot of people kind of thumb around trying to figure out what the goal is. But once you can do that, it becomes pretty effective. When we write those reports, we do them sparsely, first of all, because we're not believers that like sharing a lot of victimology is really useful to advancing the solution of the problem. But in some cases, the things that we've written about, they show patterns in attacks that we think are interesting, or they're of such a high severity that they need to be sort of discussed, but they need to be discussed in the sense that like, even so in the China one you mentioned, Chinese government hacked basically like the CIPRNet or the like European Union's like sort of like a secure communications channel they use called Core EU. And so what we really wanted to highlight was like, hey, this really critical diplomatic communications channel, right? It got hacked in exactly the same way that like the milkshake shop down the street does, right? There's really very little different to it. And that's part of the reason we wanted to share that story, is to say, even this government, this thing that people are calling elite, even this, top secret network, right? This thing that's doing all this diplomacy between the European Union nation countries, it's exactly the same thing that's happening to everyone else. And that's why it's important to talk about that. And then, obviously the elections and the stuff we did in Russia, are so critical to our democracy. So does that help?
Absolutely. No, thank you so much.
Okay, so Barnaby, what are my thoughts of the next security paradigm that takes into consideration our current systemic security weakness or natural behaviors? Well, I'm not sure, maybe Barnaby, I'm not sure I follow the question, sorry, but could you expand upon it a little bit?
Yeah, so you described again a lot of the natural processes, and I think it's architectures of technology solutions, baking in responses to what would be a natural, again, people meaning well to respond to the CEO or doing what they believe is the appropriate step and finding themselves into a position where they've compromised a full enterprise. It feels like that is a systemic weakness. What is the next security paradigm that you may be looking to say, this is where I wish we were all at?
Well, I think maybe I'll use an analogy. I'm not, and tell me if I don't answer it correctly. You know, we as humans have this sort of insatiable desire for data and to like not really trust the outcomes of our technological solutions. It's why you have a spam folder. I don't know who looks in that thing, but why we give people access to this junk? It's just a kind of waste of time. It's spam. Nobody looks at it, and it should just be thrown away. And so a lot of it, you know, I think falls into that case. Let me give you maybe another more specific security example. Some of the companies that I work with, there's kind of a crude detection, which is like a new domain registration, which is like, hey, someone registers a new domain, creates like oren@imawesome.com, and then they email, let's say, 100-year-old pharmaceutical company. They say, we're a pharmaceutical company that's been in business for 100 years. We've never spoken to a company that existed since yesterday. They don't accept mail from them. They say, wait a month or something to that effect. So a slightly crude example, but too many people are unwilling. They think in their mind, like, well, what if I'm missing that like great opportunity? Like, what if like the deal for all the opioids in you know, Kentucky was in that email from, you know, the I'm Awesome domain? In reality, like, just like with many things on our site, if you just turned it off for a little bit, like, you'd do better. And I think that it's like it's partly like a confidence question, as well as a like leadership just needs to say, like, you don't need the spam. Like, you know, you don't need the messages from someone in most contexts that just appeared on the internet yesterday. I mean, it's 2021. That's kind of silly. So does that help?
I think it does. And again, I'm still drawn to what vision of the future, security future, keeps you enthralled. We may not be there, but that you believe that, you know, like zero trust, or that you're looking at
none of that. Yeah, I mean, I'm enthralled by the vision of the future where the people who make the most money are the ones stopping the most attacks. And and I say that as just a pure level of accountability. If you, Barnaby, if you were to go look at the publicly traded cybersecurity stocks and the ones that are growing the fastest, and then you thought about correlating them to what they do, it'd be mind-blowing how ineffective they are. And if you were to look at the top 10 breaches in 2021 and try to overlay what capabilities they bring to those, they don't answer the question at all. And so that is the economics that need to change in this. And I don't say that to be like self-serving, there's a little bit of that, but if you're going to see a solution, the companies that are the largest should have the greatest impact in stopping the attacks. And the disconnect between those in the public markets today has never been greater.
And yet that's used as a correlation to stock culture to say we've invested X amount of funds to stop cybersecurity, and it was unprecedented. It was unforecasted. We were taken to the cleaners. So sorry, but we spent the money. I see your point. I see your point.
Yeah, that's part of the paradigm needs to change. Some of that's probably through regulation and so forth, but usually the ruthless equilibrium of the market would not sustain what's going on here today. This is one of the few industries where outcomes are not reflected in share price, and they should be. Automotive industry was not delivering cars, was not reducing carbon, was not increasing. It's not like safety hasn't been an issue in other industries, right? Like seatbelts, airbags, so forth, right? Those have all become winners for automotive industries, but their earnings are tied to results. So not to make
it, and that's where policy also sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. That's where policy
that's right.
changes
I mean,
also
seatbelts. People in cyber like don't love analogies. They always click the point, like Swiss cheese them to point the holes out of them. But the automotive industry fought seatbelts and airbags, and government had to come in and step in. But once it became a reality, what do you see happening? Now it's like, oh, we're crash test rated or this, that. It became part of the benefit. They could prove why their car was better. It's not just that it was cherry red, is that actually provided a better outcome. And we're just pretty far. But I challenge anyone here to go just take like the 10 largest publicly traded cybersecurity stocks, overlay their capabilities with the 10 biggest breaches from this past year and see how they don't match at all. And then ask yourself, what's up with that?
And then as a follow-up, I was wondering what opportunities exist for us here at ASU as a research-centric, innovation-centric community willing to explore boundaries in the security realm.
Well, I mean, if I was the king of Arizona State University, I would do all sorts of fun things that I know are possible. But one of them would be, I would say to folks, because it's you're a great research institution, I would tell vendors in the space that you need to take part in educating our students, right? Opening up your systems so they can be played with and explored. And only then, will we consider, doing business with you, right? And I think universities have a particularly great opportunity with cybersecurity vendors, which is to really, say, hey, open these up, right? And let us see what's going on inside. Let us teach, let us educate our students on them, and let us do experiments that help verify. And, that would be my thought.
Thank you, sir.
Well, this has been great.
This has been awesome, Oren. Thank you so much for taking the time with us and just sharing your perspectives, just sharing, your experience. Just on behalf of the University of Technology Office and Arizona State University, thank you again for the time. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight and sharing your questions and your perspectives. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. So thank
you all so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Feel free to email me. I'm oren@area1.com, and I'm happy to continue chatting or answering other questions.
And definitely take a look. Annie just dropped in the chat Oren and Area 1's March Hackness report. Pretty cool report. Been coming out for a while. It's definitely one of the ones that I look forward to reading. So definitely encourage everyone to take a look. Again, thank you for the time. Oren, just really, appreciate you sharing just the perspective tonight, man. Like, it's really hard, especially just with a lot of the different topics that you talked about. There's a lot of complexity there. So really appreciate you breaking it down to just a really simple level.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, it's my pleasure.